everyone. Welcome. Welcome to Science on Tap, live and in person. I'm very happy to see you all. Thank you for coming. My name is Carol Warden. I work at the UW Trout Lake Station up on Trout Lake in Vilas County. Science on Tap is an example of the Wisconsin idea that the boundaries of the state are the boundaries of the university. Our partners in Science on Tap include Monaco Public Library, Lakeland Badger Chapter of the Wisconsin Alumni Association, UW Kemp Natural Resources Station, UW Trout Lake Station, Oak Fire Pizza, and WXPR Radio. And Science on Tap is supported by a grant through the Brittingham Fund through University of Wisconsin-Madison. So we have 3 ways to watch. One is right here in person, like you are, which I'm very glad to see. You can also watch on YouTube Live, and we do have a comment box that you can put any questions in if you are watching online. And there's also a link on our website for that YouTube link at scienceontapmonaqua.org. Or you can watch an event later. We record all these, and we have them on our site archived, and you can go back at any point and watch those from previous events. Our next event is May 4th. And that will also be held here at Oak Fire Pizza, and we will have Karen Oberhauser from the UW Arboretum talking about monarch butterflies next month. So tonight we have John Bates to tell us about Wisconsin wild lakes. John Bates is the author of 10 books and contributor to 7 more, all of which focus on the natural history of the Northwoods of Wisconsin. He's worked as a naturalist in Wisconsin Northwoods for 32 years, leading an array of trips and giving talks, all designed to help people further understand the remarkable diversity that beauty has to offer, that nature has to offer, and what our place in nature is. He has served on the Board of Trustees for the Wisconsin Nature Conservancy, the River Alliance of Wisconsin, and the Wisconsin Humanities Council, and he currently serves on the board of the Northwoods Land Trust. John has a master's in science in environmental sciences from UW Green Bay, and he and his wife, Mary Burns, who is a fiber artist, live on the Manitowish River in Mary's grandparents' old home where they raised their 2 daughters. So, per tradition for Science on Tap, we have a trivia story about John Bates. So he's talking about wild lakes today, and on many of their adventures in search of these wild lakes, John and his compatriots would run into plenty of obstacles. And 10 out of the 140 lakes listed in his book were not even able to get to because trails ran off into becoming nothing at all in the woods, or there was a mile-long portage through a bog, or the mosquitoes were thicker than molasses. All these things that were not surmountable to get to some of these lakes that they tried to. But one day upon arrival, they were unloading their gear and set out to explore one of these wild lakes, and they discovered they had a problem, which was surmountable. So which one of these did not keep them from exploring the wild lake they were after? The trail was filled with poison ivy as thick as those mosquitoes I mentioned earlier. A bear stood in the middle of the trail, insistent on staying at its scratching post. Or they unpacked their kayak paddles only to realize they had 2 of the same ends that didn't slide together. A, B, C? C it is. 2 kayak ends that didn't match. Now, John Bates.
Yeah, I was hoping that no one was actually watching me try to paddle with just half of a kayak paddle, so that they think I knew nothing about kayaking and didn't know to use 2. Anyway, it worked out. Thanks for coming out on an otherwise not terribly pretty night, spring in the Northwoods. Appreciate that you all came. So I got 20 minutes or so to talk about wild lakes in this book that I did on this adventure that we had over the last 5 years. And so a lot of folks have asked me what possessed me to do this. And really it's an answer with a lot of permutations to it, but I need a project. I think a lot of you can relate to that, to wake up in the morning and have a purpose, to have something that's overarching that you think about all the time and want to engage in. So that was the first thing, is I just needed something to occupy myself, and Mary wanted to kick me out of the house anyway, so that was perfect. And so I thought, we have all these lakes in the Northwoods. How many of them are undeveloped? How many are still wild, still the way they were intended to be? And I had no idea, but I knew it would be a wonderful adventure to try. So the first thing that I thought of was the old saying of put yourself in the way of grace. And that's what I thought I would be able to do, was go to each one of these lakes, and each one of them has their own grace to it. And that I wanted to be a part of that. So I wanted to put myself in the way of grace. But I also wanted to do an intellectual inventory, as it were, of these lakes. I have an ecological curiosity that I'd like to know what we had and where they were, and then to try to understand why they differed and how they differed. Because I remember talking to Tim Kratz, who used to be the director of the Trout Lake station up here. I asked him many years ago, I said, "What, you guys are doing all these studies. What are you trying to figure out? Is there some big question you're trying to figure out?" And Tim's answer, I've always remembered, he said, "We're still trying to figure out what's normal." And I thought that was so interesting. What's normal? And basically nothing's normal in terms of lakes. They differ in all kinds of ways. And so intellectually, I wanted to try to go to all these lakes and look at them and try to play a bit of a detective and try to figure out how they varied. There's a great quote by E.A. Burge, one of the early scientists at the station, who said, "The lake is the one true microcosm, for nowhere else is the life of the great world and all of its intricacies so clearly disclosed to us as in the tiny model offered by the inland lake." So I wanted to try to check out those intricacies and see if I could understand them. So intellectually, I wanted to go, and then emotionally, I wanted to go. I wanted to have fun. I wanted to. It's a joyful thing for me to go to new places and to paddle lakes. It's an adventure. It's a real challenge, and to try to figure things out. I try to, as much as possible, pretend to be Sherlock Holmes, and usually end up being Inspector Clouseau. Just stumbling around, having no idea what I'm looking at or why it's occurring, but enjoying it. Just being part of it, belonging to that place. So there was that sense of exploration. Someone asked me once about this book, what surprised me the most about it, about the whole effort in looking at all these lakes. And I said, well, we were surprised every time we pulled up to a lake, because we didn't know what we were going to find. Every lake was a surprise. There's a whole community of life to find. And usually we were alone, or I was alone, and had it to ourselves to try to figure out. And I was looking for something larger too, I think, and I use this word with caution, but I was looking for something sacred, however you'd like to define that. I was looking for some wisdom, some peace of mind, something larger. As a lot of us gray-haired and white-haired and non-haired people know, that we're trying to figure out why we're here and what's this all about. So I was trying to do a little of that, and there's a lot of joy just in sharing the places, these new places, with the people I love, my wife and daughter, and then lots of good friends who managed to come along at times with us. So there was that. So there was the emotional and the intellectual side, and then it was, well, why not write a book about it? Why, because if you have to write about something, or you have to present like tonight about something, you actually have to pay attention to what you're doing and look at it really deeply, rather than just being a visitor or a tourist. You have to really engage in depth in a place so that you can at least pretend you know what you're talking about. And I wanted people to experience these places too. I wanted people to be able to go to these wild lakes and hopefully be the only person there, and to be a part of that peace and that quiet. And experience is the best teacher. And hopefully, the bottom line for me is always to help people fall more deeply in love with the natural world, because I think out of love, we do all the right things. We protect the places that need protecting. And much as we pretend to be all rational beings, we're first and foremost emotional beings. And so in writing the book, I hope that and showing people where to go. I wanted folks just to be able to be there and fall in love more deeply with northern Wisconsin and what it has to offer. Great quote by T.H. Watkins, if you don't mind me sharing. He says that love is a powerful tool, and maybe, just maybe, before the last little town is corrupted and the last of the unroaded and undeveloped wildness is given over to dreams of profit, maybe it will be love, finally love for the land for its own sake and for what it holds of beauty and joy and spiritual redemption that will make wildness not a battlefield, but a revelation. So from that love, I'm hoping folks will protect these places and also advocate to the DNR and the Forest Service and other agencies that we need more. One of the things I learned was we don't have very many wild lakes left, pretty small percentage. And anyway, not advocate for more of them. I found a lot of lakes that just had one owner of maybe a parcel on a lake, or maybe they owned the entire lake. There's a lot of folks who maybe might be willing to leave a legacy and sell that lake frontage to the DNR. So hopefully we can advocate for more of that. We used to have a wild lakes purchasing program in the state. I write about it in the book, that went for about a decade or so, from the late 90s to about 2006, where the state and the feds and other agencies worked together to try to purchase some of these last wild lakes. I'm mindful, however, that just by getting people into wild places, it doesn't mean that they're going to fall in love with places and protect them. Some people go to wild places and see them, of course, as resources to plunder for profit, right? So not all people are stirred in the right way. I'm mindful of a quote by John Muir. He was talking to the Sierra Club in 1895, and he was telling him, talking about the beautiful places of California. And he said that few are altogether deaf to the preaching of pine trees. Their sermons on the mountains go to our heart. And if people in general could be got into the woods, even for once, to hear the trees speak for themselves, all difficulties in the way of forest preservation would vanish. And a fellow named Jack Turner wrote a wonderful book, The Abstract Wild. And his response was, they got into the woods, but not everyone heard the trees speak. Muir could not have understood that setting aside a wild area would not in itself foster intimacy with the wild. So I'm mindful of that, mindful that just because you get somebody there doesn't mean they'll want to protect it. They may want to develop it. Anyhow, so how did I proceed? I bought all the plat books I could buy. I looked for all the topo maps I could find and Google Maps and historical maps, and then arbitrarily decided that I would look at lakes that were 30 acres or more, because if I looked at all the little tiny lakes, well, you'd never hear me talk because I'd be dead. It wouldn't occur. There's lots of little puddles that are undeveloped all around the state, but I decided 30 acres was a good arbitrary number to work from. Found out, and they had to have undeveloped, publicly owned land completely surrounding them. So even if a lake didn't have any houses on it, but had private land butting up to the shoreland, I wouldn't include it in the book because someone could build a house tomorrow. So anyhow, all the lakes that are in this book are, except for two, actually, I did include two that had a private parcel on it that are in the process, hopefully, of being purchased. Hopefully that will occur. So then I contacted all the people that are way smarter than me and asked them what they knew about these lakes and where to find them. And I utilized all this existing data, and there's a lot out there from the DNR and from Forest Service and Extension and UW and so forth. So I started in 2017, kind of moderately, just kind of testing the water, as it were, to see if I really wanted to do this. And then we finished up here in August of 2021, madly paddling the last lakes. So we paddled about 136 lakes or so, and I included 55 arbitrarily that I called the best lakes, of which it's highly arguable why I think they're the best, but I supposedly had some objective reasons. And then I included another 64. So there's 119 lakes in the book. I'm not trying to sell you a book. I'm just telling you how I did. Don't buy the book. Go to the library and look at it there. But anyway, found discuss and give you full directions on how to go to these 119 lakes. and hopefully bring an open heart and an open mind to just being there as a part of those places. So I paddled all sorts of lakes, and that was interesting. I mean, all these really super shallow, mucky lakes, a lot of wild rice lakes, to all the lakes that, and there weren't many, frankly, that were sandy bottomed, surrounded by pine trees with marvelous water clarity. There wasn't too many of those because those were the ones we as human beings wanted to develop first, of course. Those are the archetypal lakes, and again, not many. So what did I find? I found only 7 lakes over 200 acres in the whole state that are undeveloped. The largest was a lake called Totogatik. Anybody familiar with Totogatik Lake? No. 538 acres, wild rice from end to end. It's the biggest wild rice lake in the state. The Totogatik River flows through it. It's in Bayfield County. Really recommend it. It's absolutely gorgeous. But only 7 of them over 200 acres, and none of them that were a full square mile. So we don't have a full square mile of wild water left in the state. Vilas had the most lakes. Yay for Vilas County. They were wild, over 30 acres. There were 25 that I found in Vilas. Bayfield County, if you're not familiar with Bayfield County, it's got a lot of wild lakes. There were 19 of those over 30 acres. And Washburn, Iron, and Forest counties all had 13, so they came in 3rd place. So what did I learn? Well, I learned how impossible it is to define normal. Normal doesn't exist. But what I tried to do in the book is give 10 things that folks could pay attention to, because most of you are better paddlers, otherwise there's no reason to be here other than to drink beer and socialize, which is probably a better reason than listening to me. But you have to put up with me in order to get the beer, I guess. But anyway, 10 things to pay attention to when you're approaching a lake or thinking about paddling it. And I'll just talk about a few of them. One is how much water levels matter. We just came out of this cycle of very high water levels. Almost all the lakes that I paddled were at least 3 feet over the high water mark. And some of you, I'm sure, live on some of these lakes where the water is still super high. Last year was finally a drier summer, and a lot of water came down, but an immense amount of shoreline was submerged. A lot of white birch and white pine trees that were on shorelines were now standing in this much water around lakes all around northern Wisconsin. So water levels matter, and they're going to change the chemistry of the lake. They're going to change the shoreline vegetation, obviously, and everything that's associated with the vegetation. One of the things that Trout Lake talks about a lot is the landscape position, the elevation of lakes, and how much that matters. The highest elevation lakes are the highest in the sandbox. So if you want to go to a place that has probably the clearest water, you go to the highest elevation lake because there's not a whole lot of groundwater. There's a whole lot of nutrients that are flowing into those higher elevation lakes. If you want to go fishing, though, you go to the lower elevation lakes because that's where the nutrients are and the plant life is much more substantial. So that's something you can look at in your topo maps when you're going paddling, to just look right away at the elevation and see, well, what might I expect from both plant and wildlife values. The watershed size matters. Obviously, how small the smaller the watershed, the better in terms of having clarity of water, because fewer nutrients are coming in. The topography matters. The depth of the water matters. You guys all know this stuff, so I apologize if you already know it. But if a lake's only 4 feet maximum depth, and a lot of them were, you're just paddling on this very shallow bathtub that's very warm, and it was usually plant end to end because of that temperature. There's no gradient; it's just all warm right down to the bottom. And I love those lakes. They were the last place in the world you wanted to swim. And you put your paddle, you've all done this, put your paddle down into the water, and the paddle just goes and goes and goes. And, the technical term for that is loon shit. That's the silt that you're going down into there. But anyway, so depth matters. The surface area, how much surface area matters. What matters is the basin shape. If a lake is perfectly circular, like Crystal Lake is down in Boulder Junction, well, you don't have a lot of inputs, a lot of these little bays, you don't have a lot more vegetation falling into the lakes. You don't have a lot more nutrients coming in because you have a lot more shoreline where nutrients could come into the lake. So again, if you're looking at lakes and trying to understand why this lake 50 yards away from this other lake is completely different, and Crystal and Big Muskie are great examples of that in Boulder Junction. They're very different lakes. Elevation matters, and all these other things matter. The shoreline irregularity and morphology, basin shape, all that stuff matters. But anyway, there's some of that in the book about what to pay attention to. But I wasn't trying to write a limnology textbook. I leave that to Carol and to Noah and the people that are a whole lot brighter than I am to do that. And it's just a lot of work too. I didn't want to do that. I just wanted more to have fun and to go find these places and share those as a guidebook more than a naturalist textbook. And I've written enough of those. They're a lot of work, so I took the easy way out. Just want to speak a few more minutes about the value of wild lakes, why you should care about them. For one, they're an intact community of life, right? They have fun. Almost all of them, as best as I could tell in a superficial visit, had what they were supposed to have. They had an intact community of life, floral and faunal life, and very few invasives. I was really pleased with how few of these lakes had any invasive species, at least that I could tell. So that they not only had the species, they had intact processes and intact interactions taking place. So nothing was being left out in that regard. And so those lakes are the scientific benchmarks. They're the gold standard by which folks from the Trout Lake Station and the DNR managers and Forest Service managers, that's what they have to look for as the model by which they should be managing toward. What is it that we want in our lakes? I think the natural wild lakes are that gold standard, what it is we should look to try to emulate as much as we can. So from that standpoint, wild lakes are immensely valuable. They're a genetic storehouse. You know, the first law of trying to protect the natural world is to keep all the parts, right? You want to have a parts inventory, and so these wild lakes have all their parts. And if we ever need to move parts around because this lake over here has been developed and it no longer has X, we can maybe find some of X in a wild lake if there's a multitude of it and move it to this other lake. There's all the educational opportunities to take people into these wild places. And I think there's all this aesthetic value. Put yourself in the way of grace is an aesthetic value. The beauty of these places, one writer said beauty is not optional. It's not optional in our lives. Why do you all live up here? Did you all move up here to make a whole lot of money? If any of you did, you were sadly mistaken, right? Probably. Maybe you did. But most of us moved here for beauty and stay here for beauty, not because we love what's happening in April here. These are long, long winters, if you haven't figured that out yet. There's a price we pay, for living here, but to be part of beauty, gosh, that's everything in so many ways. John Muir said we need beauty as well as bread. Absolutely. So all those aesthetic reasons are some of the values of wild lakes. And finally, I want to address the question that's come up to me a number of times from folks. I don't know if it's a question or more of an accusation. Should I have written the book? Should I have told people where these wild lakes are? I've had a number of people say you should not have told anybody, wag their finger at me and say I've made a big mistake. And that's a legitimate viewpoint. I honor that concern because we can love places to death. Absolutely no question about it. We can love places to death, but we can also, the counter argument to that, the other side of the coin is we can love places into life. We can, because of our love, protect places. And I think from my standpoint, I'm more concerned about how politically we do, I'm not going to go any further than to say politically in general, we're capable of doing foolish things. We're capable of saying we have too much public land, we should sell it off. We need more on the tax rolls, et cetera, et cetera. You've all heard these things. And there's some rational validity to some of that. But unless people know about these lakes and have visited them and are in love with them, when the next time some politician says we should sell 10,000 acres of northern Wisconsin DNR land, which happened not too many years ago, right? Just arbitrarily said we need to sell 10,000 acres. Who's going to stand up for those lakes if no one's been there? if some of you have been there and you can then pound on the table and say, no, this is something worth saving, then it'll be saved. So some of you will still hate me for having outed your favorite lake to all kinds of other people. I apologize for that. But I think that love is, loving a place is more valuable than worrying about loving it to death. And I'm reminded of one quote that I really like: no one ever washed a rental car. I really like that. Although whenever I ask people in the audience, there's always somebody that raises their hand and said they did wash a rental car. Has anyone here ever washed a rental car? Just I knew it. Yeah, 2 people. But you were driving through a whole lot of mud and you were afraid you're not going to get your money back, right? Yeah. So, most of the time it was a monetary decision. It wasn't an ethical decision. It wasn't something you said, I need morally to wash this rental car. So we need ownership of places. We need a marriage to places, as it were. Ownership not in a title sense, but ownership in a heartfelt sense, right? And I think, again, we protect what we love. So it's a moot point now. The book's out. If you're mad at me, tough luck. It exists. And I think most folks will really hopefully fall in love with our lakes even more because of it. I did 55 best, 64 best of the rest. I kept 10 secret. That was my forgiveness act. I hope. I won't tell you what those 10 are. I don't care how much you ask. And Carol alluded to the fact that 10 we never got into because we just weren't willing to suffer enough. If you're willing to suffer, if you're a lot younger and you think this is cool to cross a mile-long bog, feel free. But we weren't. We got to this one. We got to a number of places and we just looked at each other and said, no. We'll give directions. We'll say what we know about them and we'll wish you luck. And so there's 10 of those in the book as well. Okay, I'm done.
All right,
Thank
we
you.
have... We have Amber here with a microphone, so raise your hand with any questions and she will make her way to you all. So please wait patiently for the mic though.
Hi, John.
Hi. How
Well,
are
I
you?
just want to say thank you. I picked up your book a couple of days ago and I flipped the pages to page 40. And it was rather close to where I'm living and I hadn't ever been there before. So I went and scoped it out yesterday.
Yeah.
It was delightful, still frozen, of course, but I'm really, really looking forward to going back and not only exploring that, but really checking out so many of the things that you have written about. I find that when I go out paddling, if there's any homes on a lake, I paddle around those first because I want to end my experience with just wilderness. And now you've given me that chance to do that more often.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you. That's great.
Hi. I know you said that the ecosystems were intact in these lakes and stuff, but did you see like the larger mammals or the swans, otters, things like that, the larger creatures?
We did. One of the problems in doing an endeavor like this is it's superficial. I mean, what I know as a naturalist is you need to go back to places again and again and again, all times of the day, over all seasons, and then you can pretend to know something about a place. So a lot of these lakes I was just at one time and would spend 3 hours slowly paddling around the shoreline. And so, if you're in the middle of the day at noon, the bird life isn't too hot. And if you're there in the spring, it's different than if you're there in the fall. The best lake wildlife for us, I think, was a lake called Chippewa Lake in Bayfield County, where we went there in early May. And there were 18 trumpeter swans on that lake. And that was just gorgeous. It's another wild rice lake. But yes, we saw some otters, certainly lots of beaver, lots of songbirds, loons, and so forth. No bull moose, unfortunately, I kept hoping for that bull moose to greet us somewhere. Didn't happen. Anyway, we didn't get to enough places at dawn. That's when you need to be there. And we were messing around all times of the day. And anyhow, we saw a lot, but nowhere near what we could have seen if we'd seen it over many seasons.
I was going to ask, I asked this on YouTube, so you don't have to answer this, YouTube people, what the highest lake was. But what I'm actually more interested in is the highest lake, by implication, the clearest lake. And is there any correlation there, or is there a clearest lake?
Well, so it's a tendency. How much higher percentage that the higher elevation lakes are going to be clear, because they're usually seepage lakes. They're just getting their water via precipitation. But it's not always the case, because if you have a really shallow seepage lake high in the landscape, it may still be warmed up and have a lot of aquatic plant life and a lot of decomposition and be cloudy or more turbid. So what was the highest elevation lake? Is that what your question was?
Sure, yeah.
Gosh, I don't know. It's probably around 1,700 feet. Oh, you asked what the clearest lake was. Yeah, so I would go with two lakes. Pallet Lake. Pallet Lake has maybe 26-foot water clarity, and Day Lake, both in Vilas County here. Day Lake is another one that's like 26-foot water clarity in that ballpark. Can you think of any? Those are two, and I won't give away a couple of the others.
The rest are secret.
John, thank you for everything you do here. I really appreciate it, and we are so very lucky. My question is all of these lakes that you haven't hit, maybe you'll have a sequel in another season. I feel like sometimes access to those lakes, regardless of the season, can be just as beautiful. Curious if you've considered visiting those lakes or created a group that would be interested in hitting those last secret private lakes.
So are you suggesting that there's other wild lakes I need to go to yet? Is that what you're?
Well, there are options, right? You said there were 10 you didn't get to because
Yes.
mosquitoes, they don't live right now.
Good point.
Including other conflicts. So I think winter is a good time to visit a lake. I
Absolutely.
enjoy my winter lakes as well.
Good point. Good point. But I think I did actually get to almost all. There may be 2 or 3 wild lakes that we didn't get to in terms of finding. Not finding, I mean, that we knew about. I think there's 2 or 3 that we didn't find in the books to even try to get to, is all I'm very poorly trying to say. So there's no sequel in that regard. All the wild lakes that are in northern Wisconsin are pretty much entailed in the book. But those 10, we need to get to them. You're right. You want to organize a trip? Is that what you're saying? No. Okay. Cool. All right.
John, we're all creatures of habit, and it's nice to have a book like this to get us off our path and say, let's go try that lake instead of our favorite one that we do every month.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's too easy just to go back to the same places.
Did you differentiate lakes with public access? I mean, like Day Lake you can bring motorboats in there, and lakes that have motorboat travel versus lakes that are have no public access except a tough portage. And did you fish any of them?
Right. So I did at some length talk about whether there was a pier, whether there was a boat landing, whether you had to portage in, how long the portage was. So all that information is available on that. There were 2 lakes I did include that had motorboats allowed on them. And ordinarily I would say that would disqualify them as a wild lake, but they were undeveloped, totally surrounded by public land. And my hope would be that at some point the powers that be say, no more power boats. There are a number of them that allow electric motors. Yeah, for sure. And there's other ones that are really, really hard to get to. So what was the last part of your question? No, I'm not a fisherman. And so I left out all information regarding the fish because I don't know anything. It's pretty simple. Plus I thought, there's so many fishing guidebooks out there and so many people that write about fishing that given my total lack of expertise, I shouldn't touch it anyway, but there was no need for me to touch it because it's usually covered by other people way smarter than me already. So there's nothing in there about fish. That doesn't mean all kinds of fishermen haven't already bought the book and are raring to go to get into it. I know that's going to happen.
We have a question from our viewers on YouTube. If you compare two lakes of similar size at different elevations, what factors will determine the time of ice out?
What factors will determine the time of ice out? Well, the elevation won't have anything to do with ice out.
Like
I mean, yeah, if you had a
12,000
mountain
feet.
lake or something, but I mean, we're talking about a couple hundred feet in northern Wisconsin, between 1,700 and 1,500 or 1,400 feet. Latitude. But if you're in a northern Wisconsin lake, elevation is not going to have much to do with ice out. What's going to have a lot to do with ice out is the size of the lake. Trout Lake's the last to go out because it's the biggest lake we have. The small lakes go out early. The shallowest lakes go out early. Deeper lakes keep their ice longer. Lakes that have more wind fetch across them go out earlier than other lakes that are more protected. Those are the factors you look for ice out, but not elevation as a general rule around here anyway.
I don't know if you've touched on this at all anywhere, but what I was interested in, if you have any comments on salt use on the roads around here and its impact on the lakes and the use of brine to decrease the use of salt. It seems to be somewhat effective, and I'm wondering if you have any comments.
Yeah. I didn't write about it in the book, and to be honest, I know it's a major topic, but it's not something that I have really looked into deeply. Would you want to comment?
Have a professor at UW-Madison looking at that now, and she's collecting a lot of research, but we definitely see, I don't know numbers off the top of my head, but lakes like Sparkling Lake that are right on the highway definitely have a higher salinity factor than ones that aren't.
Comments about the use of the brine on the roads to decrease the total use of salt.
I'm not sure about the difference between brine and salt at this point, but Hillary Dugan is the professor that looks at that, and I'm sure she has some knowledge on it.
We have another online question. Has the popularity of kayaks opened up discovery of heretofore unknown lakes, and what is that impact?
Well, my knee-jerk reaction is kayaks actually are a lot harder to portage into places than a canoe, so they aren't opening up any more lakes by dint of paddling a kayak versus a canoe. I got a very nice little 22-pound canoe that I was able to portage into all of these lakes, which was fabulous. And I had a kayak, and that was a pain in the rear end to try to get that one in there. So, I mean, the fact that more people are buying kayaks, we used to sell boats. 80% of the sales of our boats, we sold Perception kayaks and Current Designs kayaks and Winona canoes. 80% of our boats were being sold mostly to women, retired women up here who wanted the little 9 to 12 foot boats. Their husbands were home watching golf, wasting their life away. While, no offense to golf, but they wanted to get out there and paddle. So there are a whole lot of women that are doing fabulous amounts of paddling up here. Well, I don't know what all us guys are doing, but maybe we're paddling too, but we're not in groups. We don't have the lady yackers and all these different groups up here that are doing, I mean, they have 50 to 100 women in these groups, and there's like 4 or 5 of them, and they go out every week in their kayaks because they're small kayaks, but I don't think they're portaging into any wild lakes that are hard to get to. They're going to boat landings. I'm going to get in trouble for that golf comment. I know. It's the TV part. I meant just TV.
I had a question about camping. Did you
About what?
About camping? Did you
Okay.
paddle and camp on any of these lakes? And if you did, I don't know, which one was your favorite?
So what was really wonderful about this is that we bought a camper, which we'd been talking about doing for like 80 years or more. And it was a business expense. It was just fabulous, so we could write it off. It was great. So yeah, we took our camper because I'm getting old and, laying on the ground isn't the happiest thing anymore. So yes, we camped along some of the lakes, and I list in the back of the books the lakes that have campsites on them, the lakes that have public campgrounds on them. And so, yes, they're in here. And we did camp on some. Lake Laura was a place we camped over in Forest. Yeah, it was Forest County. Beautiful little campground there. I need my wife to fill me in on the other ones, but there were a couple others we took the camper to, certainly. Yeah, but they're listed in the back. So, yes.
Do you have a favorite time of day on a lake?
Yeah, dawn, for sure. Absolutely. Nothing compares.
Did you clean your kayak or canoe after going from lake to lake? Because I worry about that because I roam around too.
Sure. Well, I mean, we did the best we could. We didn't have access to hoses or anything, but yeah, we paid attention. Absolutely.
Thank you so much for your presentation today. I'm definitely here to drink beer and socialize, but this summer I plan on kayaking in some of the lakes around here, and I'll look for some of your wild lakes. How many are in Oneida County? And my second question is, were all the lakes that you paddled ones that had names? And if they didn't, are you able to name them?
I'm so powerful. Yes, they allow me to name lakes. Well, Wisconsin supposedly has 15,000 lakes. However, there's only, I think, 5,800, if I have my number right, somewhere around 5,800 that have names, which tells you how small of lakes, small water bodies we count as lakes. I read somewhere it was 2.2 acres is what we consider a lake. Most people would call that a pond, maybe. What's the difference between a pond and a lake, a stream and a river? I don't know where those differentiations are made. But as for Oneida County, I have a listing of the Oneida County. I have all the wild lakes that I went to listed by county in the back of the book. I don't have that number memorized. It wasn't one of my top 3, but there was, I think, 9 or 10, and there's surprisingly not as many as there should be in Oneida County, but Oneida got developed, I think, earlier because it's a little further south and people got there sooner, I think. But there's some beautiful ones in Oneida. Yeah.
John?
Yeah.
You come off as a philosopher, or you just at the beginning of your speech, and then you point 10 things that our scientists are looking at. So I'm asking you to come full circle with a question. If we study all these lakes and we have all these specialists that are specialists in one aspect, from the university to the DNR, and we continue to lose our quality of our lakes, where do you see, looking at your philosophical thing, on what we can do to change what we're doing, whether scientifically or philosophically, to stop this progress, or what you would say non-progress, on preserving these lakes, the integrity that Leopold always talked about?
Yeah. Well, I've often said to Susan Knight and some other folks in the Trout Lake station that they have hundreds of marvelous studies, but I wish they had the same number of communicators of the science that they have scientists, because we have all these lake associations, and Carol goes and talks to a whole lot of those folks, and I've talked to a bunch, but we have people that are in love with their lake, but their ecological literacy is not as strong as their emotional literacy, if you will, to their lake. And so we need that combination. We need the heart and the mind to come together. And what's always interested me is everybody doing science in these lakes is doing them first and foremost because they love lakes. You don't do science unless you love the place in the first place. So we always diminish the subjective, the emotional, and say, you know, we can't talk about that. It's not objective enough. But I think we need to talk about it and need to value it and say, what's most important in all of our lives? Let's just admit it. It's the people we love. It's the places we love. And the science is super necessary to support that love. We need to know what we're doing. What's discouraging to me is when I go to public meetings and there are citizens who are in love either with forests or lakes or whatever it might be, and then they say things that are just ecologically wrong. And then the scientists all and the managers, you know, dismiss the public and say, oh, they don't know what they're talking about. So it's really important we know what we're talking about scientifically, but it's maybe more important that we bring the passion and the love there. That's the only reason we'll show up at those meetings, which are awful to be a part of as a general rule anyway. Very discouraging usually. But I don't know, I'm just rambling, but we need them both.
One thing that you could do as a person who lives up here, especially if you have frontage, is visit some of these wild lakes and try and mimic that shoreline as closely as possible on your own property. That does a tremendous amount of protection and for the water quality, for the livelihood of the lake, for the fish that you like to eat from the lake, all those things. If you can mimic that natural shoreline, that can make a huge difference parcel by parcel.
Saying private, we have government conservation, we have government science, but just as Leopold said, it's the ownership of that shoreline.
Yeah.
Okay, whether you own you don't own the lake, it's public water. You can't do something with what you do own. Okay, private land management as opposed to public land management. That's the line that we gotta draw. And who's going to be successful at saving things? Yeah, I get philosophical. That's my answer to you. I understand that. But and like you, John just said, it's back to it's education. Okay, I agree 100%.
Yeah.
Who's listening? Okay, we got to start with the little kids. Okay, your grandkids. You know I'm
Well, you know, I write about it in the back of the book. I talk about the public trust doctrine. So we have legal mechanisms to protect places, but who is doing the legal work to make sure that happens? And what I advocate for is that we do the best we can to eliminate oversight by the DNR and the Forest Service because we take it upon ourselves to do what's right. That would be wonderful. I mean, that's pie in the sky, but an awful lot of lake associations are doing some amazing work up here. I'm so impressed. A lot of talks I've given to lake associations, I have to sit through their meeting before I'm allowed to talk. And their meetings are great. I mean, just really impressive, the amount of study they've put into their lakes, and they're bringing in specialists, and they really are inventorying their lakes so they know the species along their shorelines. They know what's within their lake bodies and so forth. That's what has to be done. And then we'll argue forever about how to best manage it because there's no truth and there's no normal to say that the Bible says this is what you do in this lake. It may not be what you should do in the next lake. So every lake's different. And we just all have to get energized and do the work, species by species. You know, the image is always like a coral. You know, it's a slowly accruing coral. That's kind of how our education is. And we'll never get it all done in this lifetime. We'll do the best we can. The more you know, the less you know. That's so classic for me, of finding out all the things I didn't know because I finally learned about this. And I was like, that opened up this door to that. You know, I'm going on too long too. Yeah.
We have another online question. What are you most concerned with as the world's temperature rises?
Everything. My children. God. most concerned about? Like, boy, what a hard question to try to answer. Well, let's just bring it down to the Northwoods. So by 2080, 2095 in that ballpark, we're going to be in oak savanna. What does that say? We're going to be in oak savanna, for Christ's sakes. And this isn't political. It's not. I mean, it's temperature. It's pretty simple. We all drive Highway 51, well, most of us, and head south, and we see the vegetation changing. And when you get to Madison, you're hitting oak savanna. Well, bring that temperature up to us, which is what's going to happen and worse, potentially. That's who we're going to be. And all that we value about the Northwoods is at risk. Now, I love oak savannas, but if I wanted to live in an oak savanna, I would move to the oak savanna. We're going to lose all of our northern species that were at the southernmost range of a whole lot of farther northern species, and those species are already moving north. We're already bringing southern species up here. It's already happening. So what we value, what we love about this place, why we moved here, is all at risk. It simply is. And we have a short time frame to change, and we've done an amazing thing. So every day is different for me emotionally, because some days I'm really optimistic because I see how much we're doing with wind power and solar power and electric cars and da-da-da. I mean, there's so much good work being done compared to 30 years ago. It's just phenomenal, but it's not fast enough. So we got to hit the pedal to the metal a lot harder. We got to vote for the right people. I don't care if they're Republicans or Democrats, the right people who recognize what's going on and will work to change it.
John, I'm kind of highlighting on what this gentleman up here had to say. Unfortunately, we live in a world today that's powered by the almighty dollar. And he's saying, what can we do to preserve what we have now today? I live off the land. I'm a naturalist. I spend all my time on the water I can, whether it's hard water or soft water. And I've got a lot of friends that aren't hunters or fishermen, but they are very much canoeists, kayakers, and I participate in that myself. But one of my answers is, if everybody here would talk to some of their friends and say, I don't care if you hunt or if you fish, you still use our natural lakes to kayak in, to canoe in, to swim in. I don't care if you fish. I don't care if you hunt. Buy a fishing or a hunting license, because that's where our DNR gets our money to preserve what we love up here. You don't have to do all the things that other people do, but the dollar amount, unfortunately, is what makes our world rock. And without the dollar amount, our DNR cannot buy other lands, cannot do things. So just tell your friends or anybody else, don't care if you hunt, don't care if you fish, buy a license and support our DNR so they can work for us.
You know, I'd amend that just a tad, in the sense that on the latest Conservation Congress questionnaire, there was a question that's been around now for several decades of whether or not we should have all of us canoeists, kayakers pay a fee to license our craft. And we should. And that way, that money could be sequestered then for the non-resource taking purposes. So, the reason, so I think we need to do that. And I own way too many boats, and I'm not happy about this idea. It's going to cost us a lot of money. But money is what makes the management take place. And what we have today, to be slightly political, but hopefully not too much, is a lot of our wildlife managers are constrained to only manage huntable species. And that's the downside to buying just a hunting or a fishing license, is because that money is going to just those activities. So for instance, several wildlife managers I know are being told they can't study and or engage in managing non-huntable species. They can't do a bird count. They can't do anything with butterflies or insects. They can't do anything except for deer and walleye and so forth, because that's where all the money is coming from. So we need, as people who may or may not hunt and fish, but want these other values as well, we need to put our money out there. So we need to push government to do that, even though it'll cost us. So I agree with you.
John, I have a question in regards to the one about the climate change. I'm not on the water, but for those of us, and I don't think it matters if you're on the water or not, if you're trying to bring more native species into your yard,
Mhm.
would it be better to be doing what's here now?
Mhm.
Or would it be better to be looking down the road and planting things for the insects and the
Yeah.
plants for what's to come?
It's a great question. And so there's an awful lot of people who are engaged in that whole adaptive process of just accepting that climate change is happening and it will continue to happen. And what should we do? So foresters are particularly concerned. You know, trees are long-lived. What should you plant? So you should not, probably be planting those species that are at the southernmost edge of their range. And those would be the species we're going to lose, are species like white birch, white spruce, black spruce, tamarack, jack pine. White pine's going to be in some trouble. Aspen's going to be in some trouble. These are all species, if you look at range maps, that either end here in northern Wisconsin and then are way up to the north, or maybe go down to central or southern Wisconsin. So from a tree species standpoint, look at the range maps and maybe start planting some of those that have a lower range. Sugar maple, basswoods, or go well down. Hemlocks are another one at risk, but they're at risk from insect and other issues as well. Yeah, I would love us to say, not do this adaptation. That's so stupid. Stop climate change so we don't have to adapt. I mean, it's going to be a lot harder to do all this adaptation than it would be to stop the climate change. I just don't get it. Yeah, but it makes sense to do what you're saying. We grow now azaleas in our yard and some other things we would never consider planting. We, from a gardening standpoint, have another month of growing time than when we moved here in 1984. So if I try to convince anybody of climate change occurring now, I just say, well, if you're a gardener, are you harvesting things a lot later in the year than you used to? Oh yeah, everybody is. We never could harvest tomatoes, red tomatoes. When we first moved here, we always harvested green tomatoes about August 20th because that was our first frost. We had a 75-day freaking growing season. It was terrible. And now it's September 20th or later than we have our first frost in the fall, and we can plant earlier, usually now by June 1st rather than June 12th. We always had to wait. Anyway, I'm getting carried away, but yes, look at some adaptive plants that are more southern that would make sense if they're long-lived.
I do hunt a little and I fish a little, very little. And I do buy a patron license every year. But because of that, I do have the opportunity to answer all kinds of surveys throughout the year.
Okay.
And I don't know if it really has any effect, but at least my word is on the record for advancing all of this. But my real question is, do you have any comments about what should we do about lakes like Minocqua here? They're very heavily developed. Is any suggestions?
What did you say? Turn her microphone on. Wow, boy. So the hyper-developed lakes. Boy. All can just educate the lake owners. We're not going to somehow reduce the number, I'm sure, along the lake shores. You'll still have the same number. The question is, can we educate those and all the public boat landings that people are coming in with their high-powered boats? How can we have people see the value of the community of life in that lake as more important than using it as a ball field or as a playground? You know, when I was a young man, I looked at lakes as a playground. I looked at them as a surface, like a ball field that I could play on. And I water skied and I had a great time. You know, the last thing I was out looking for were herons or loons or anything else. I just didn't have the consciousness to care. I wasn't a bad person. I just didn't know that it mattered. You know, so how do we get people to care that it matters? That matters as much, if not more, and therefore slow down the motorboat traffic. You know, get rid of the wakeboards, you know, blow them up now while we can, that kind of thing. I shouldn't say that. But I don't care. I'm old. What are they going to do to me? Leave them all in Lake Minocqua? Oh, we're really going to get in trouble here. I'll never be asked to speak here again. Oh, well. So it's really hard on hyperdeveloped lakes. How do we get everyone to agree on what makes sense and to reduce their fun? How do we become citizens where we care about our responsibility versus our rights to do whatever we want? How do we get there? I don't know.
I have a two-part question and one comment. The comment first is that there's a group called Lake Leaders out of Stephen Point, Wisconsin, which is dedicated to educational activities of lake associations and private homeowners. Would definitely recommend to look at that program. It's right now, I think, up to crew 13, and each crew is around 12 to 15 people. And it's a very worthwhile organization, and it is working to educate people in the Northwoods and throughout the state on water quality, invasives, and all sorts of good things. In fact, there's a convention going on right now in
Yes.
Green Bay. I have two questions. First, what's inspiring you now? And second, are there wild rivers to investigate?
Sequel. Boy. So from a work standpoint, what I'm working on right now is a book of poetry inspired by Wendell Berry, if you're familiar with Wendell Berry at all. And so what I'm doing is taking pieces of individual poems, a sentence or three, and listing them at the top of the poem and then responding to that. So I almost have that book done. So that's from a personal inspiration standpoint. I'm trying to write poetry of some degree of quality of Wendell Berry's, which I'll never get to, but using that as inspiration. I guess so many people inspire me. My wife is currently doing an exhibit on woman and water. It's an international exhibit where she's weaving portraits of all these women around the world that have done outstanding, incredible, heroic things that just blow me away. So come see her exhibit. It'll be, I'm giving her a plug. I shouldn't be doing that. But it's just been so much fun because if you were to look at the world and say, who are the heroes right now? There's so many. There really are. So when we're investigating who she should weave, who are the women doing the best work on water in the North Pole and the Antarctic, in wherever, all over the world, in rivers and oceans. It's just astonishing how many women are doing fabulous work, and men. So there's so much optimism for me around that, and therefore why we should be able to stop climate change, because we have all these people doing amazing people. All of you, I suspect, are the same, just amazing people. Your second question was wild rivers. Well, we already have some designated, the popple and pine, and gosh, what are the other wild rivers? Wolf River is, I don't know if it's designated, but there's lots of wild rivers to paddle in northern Wisconsin yet. Flambeau, North and South Fork have lots of wild stretches. The little Manitowish where we live on, from our house where we live in the big city of Manitowish down to the Turtle Flambeau Flow, 16 miles. There isn't a whole house, a single house for 16 miles. It's slow and meandering, and it's perfect for going slow. And I think that's one of the things we need to learn how to do is go slow. I always laugh how our parents told us to quit poking around. And I think one of our goals in life now is to start poking around. We need to poke around a lot more. Go slow. So there are lots of rivers to explore. I mean, there's great books on that. I'm not going to do a book on that because that would require me to paddle lots of rapids and I would die. I value my body at this point.
Hey, John.
Gosh, lots of questions.
You are such a genuine personality, and every time I get to see you and be around you, it is just such an awesome thing. We spent some time doing some Nicolay College paddling trips when I was guiding for that, and a section of river that we would go down that would normally take about 2 hours to go down, it took us 4. My question is, how long did it take you to get around even a 200-acre lake to do this book?
Depending on how many cool things we were seeing. This one lake that I write about, so I don't mind talking about, it's called McKinley Lake. It's a 42-acre lake over by, it's 15 miles east of Eagle River. It's where Franklin Butternut Lakes are. The military road is all right over in that area. It took me forever to get around that lake because it had all this fabulous shoreline plant life. I got nowhere, and that was great. I mean, so some, weren't frankly all that interesting, but some of that was because I was paddling in early May and maybe things weren't up yet, or late fall and things were dying back. So it all depended on the time frame. But McKinley Lake had all these trees that had fallen into the water many, many decades before, and they'd all been colonized by moss. And on top of the moss, then came all these bog plants, and they're loaded with sundews, these little carnivorous plants. And these were ecosystems. These logs were each individual bog ecosystems, and there were dozens of them all around the lake. It was fabulous from my geeky standpoint, So, and what birds were singing, if it was later May and the birds were going nuts, well, I'd get nowhere. I mean, that's classic for us. The longer it takes, the more fun you're having, the more there is to see and hear. We should stop, right?
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, John Bates, for all these wonderful remarks. Thanks to everyone who participated tonight, and thanks to our sponsors, the Lakeland Badger Chapter of UW Alumni Association, Monaco Public Library, UW Kemp Natural Resources Station, UW Trout Station, WXPR Radio, and the Brittingham Foundation. Remember, our next Science on Tap is May 4th, and we'll be talking about monarch butterflies. And if you want to sign up for any email reminders, you can do that at the table back there. And before you all go anywhere, we're giving away 4 of his books tonight. So your name will be pulled at random here, and maybe you'll win a book. And if not, there's some for sale. I can give that plug. Oh, you're caught up in it. There we go.
Kate Orloff. Woohoo.
Where's Kate? Is Kate here? Did you leave? You must be present to win.
All right. Dave Blunk.
Dave, is he? Did he
you
should
leave
be
him?
able? He should be able to keep one. He had a
Why?
medical emergency and he had to leave.
Well, that's fair.
So we'll
enough.
save one for
Okay.
him. Otherwise, without a doubt, he would be here talking to you afterwards.
Medical emergency. Okay. Jean Nienow? Nienow? Nienow?
There we go.
Hey, Jean.
All right. Right behind you.
Thank you. You bet. Sure. A lot of pressure here. Let's see. God bless my eyes.
Ryan White.
There we go.
Was this one of these was yours?
Yeah.
Okay.
We could give it away too if we want.
It's okay. One more.
Sure. The tension is palpable. Let's
Mhm.
see here. Nikki Close. Nikki? Okay.
Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you very much. And John will stick around for a little while, and we have more books in the back if you'd like.